So it's in Cleveland, divisional matchup, obviously a big deal. Matchup that matters. What do you got?
Browns defensive line against the Bengals offensive line. Cincinnati's doing well as far as their offensive line goes. They are much improved. They are sixth in pass blocking grade at a 69.5. And they rank sixth in pressure percentage allowed. Also, Joe Burrow has wheels. Who knew?
Better wheels than I thought.
Well, I think we were all like, oh, he can do that. Okay, great.
He's fully healthy though, which is great. That's what that run told me. He is fully healthy. He doesn't care. He was tucking it, running it, and it was like, all right, Joe. It was the Shaq meme. It was like, I was unfamiliar with your game.
I mean, like, it's not even really anything he did at LSU. So
no. Now, like, he's slippery. You know, he could be escape artist, but like a run like that,
it's more like moving around in the pocket, and if he can do that, and which is like come around to bite him in the butt too a couple of times. But yeah, I mean, like he took that intentional grounding penalty because like he like went around and did a bunch of things, but he was like still in the pocket and ended up throwing it. Just but. That now what Joe Burrow can get himself out of sticky situations. He can get himself out of pressure, which the offensive line isn't even allowing at this point. Great. That's even better dynamic to add to this Bengals offense. Not that they need it because they're not the issue. But the Browns, we'll get to that in a second. But the Browns defensive line, obviously led by Myles Garrett, they rank 21st in EPA per play in the pass rush. So it really is just Myles Garrett in a lot of ways that you have to worry about. But they are tied for the 10th most in sacks. So they can affect the quarterback. They can make life, a little bit tricky, hard on him. They can hurry up the quarterback, force some errant throws, all that kind of stuff that you have to be wary of when you're going against a front that's this good and a front that includes Myles Garrett at the end of the day, who is top 10 in a lot of these major pass rushing statistics and metrics that we use.
I am actually going to flip to the other side and say that I think the matchup that matters is Browns offensive line versus the Bengals defensive line here because it's two somewhat struggling units, although I will get to what the Bengals are doing in a second. The Browns offensive line, though, I said this on the review show on Monday. This is an offensive line that I think we've talked about this offensive line as one of the best in the NFL over the last 3 to 4 years. And with all the injuries that they've dealt with, I think in our minds, at least me personally, I've thought, okay, well, yeah, they're struggling, but they were a top 5 group before this. So struggling is probably, middle of the pack in the NFL. They're still probably okay. Carmen, they're terrible. They're really bad. The only offensive line with a lower team blocking grade than the Browns is the Patriots. That's it. 53.4 overall blocking grade this season. They're tied for the most sacks allowed on third down with 12. They're tied for the most sacks credited to the offensive line on third down with 8. I mean, obviously Deshaun Watson's not playing well. Obviously, there's a reason why we're talking about Deshaun Watson. His play has been poor as well. Their offensive line is almost worse than Deshaun. And so I think certainly, if you made a change, you went with Jameis, I think things would be a little bit better because I don't even know if Deshaun's arm is, what it used to be. But maybe you just get the backup quarterback bump and the team's excited for it, and Jameis isn't afraid to throw it deep down the field, we know. But, I mean, behind this offensive line, it would regulate anyways. It would kind of come down from that high because unless they play better, it's really hard to envision the Cleveland Browns having success. Now, the Bengals defensive line specifically, I think is very interesting because through the first 4 weeks of the season, we just talked about this as all right, this is Trey Hendrickson and no one else. And even though it's still Trey Hendrickson's defensive line for sure, over the last 2 weeks, these have been the 2 weeks in which the team has had their most total pressures in a single game. And that's not just Trey Hendrickson. Sam Hubbard's playing better. BJ Hill is playing better. And so the defensive line is getting a little bit better. They're no longer bottom of the barrel like they were for the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season. So with that defensive line getting a little better, this is a ripe matchup for them to say, okay, first 3-4 weeks of the season, warm up, we're throwing it out. We're feasting on a bad offensive line, and we'll see what they're really made of here with this game going up against a struggling Cleveland Browns offensive line. I will say my plus factor in this game, Carmen, I don't know if you read the Players Tribune piece by Nick Chubb, but Nick Chubb is coming back and he is playing in this game, and It is a wonderful tribute in the Players Tribune. If you guys have not read it, you should. Nick Chubb talks about what he went through overcoming this injury, how it was the second catastrophic knee injury that he has had, the one that he had at Georgia, and reflecting on what that was like versus this one and reflecting what this was like, and truly not knowing if he would ever play football again. You know, when he got hurt at Georgia, when he had the gruesome knee injury at Georgia, he says in the article, sure, you know, it's a tough injury and you know there's a lot of work ahead, but he's like, I never thought about like I wasn't going to play football again. He's like, at this point in my career going through this again, he's like, there were thoughts about that creeped up of, am I ever going to play football again? And you know, for him to be able to come back and even just make it to this point, you know, there's a press conference, I think it was on Wednesday, where you know, he got up and got to speak to the media, and as he got to the podium, you hear in the background his teammates are going crazy. They're yelling, they're hollering for him just because he's back up there on that podium getting to talk about what it's like getting ready for a game again. And so it's just a really, really good feel-good story. I don't know what Nick Chubb is going to be like. I don't know if it's going to be the Nick Chubb of old, but it's just going to be really, really cool to see him out there and put a helmet back on. So to me, whatever he could bring to the table as a spark to this team, not only in the yards that he would be able to get, but also just the inspiration, I think it'd be a plus factor for Cleveland in this one.
Yeah, no, I love that. And we obviously hope that he can return to form and do some good things and trust the knee. And I have to imagine that it's so much like once the knee is healed, there's the whole other process of healing the brain and figuring out, can you trust your knee? Can you trust yourself? It's a whole thing with these guys. And I'm so glad that these guys have an outlet like the Players Tribune to really like peel back the curtain and say, this is what we actually have to go through to come back from injuries. And it's a really long and prolonged process. So I love that. I'm going to go back to the Bengals defense and see another thing that they are doing well, which is they are limiting explosive plays of 20 yards or more. They have allowed just 13 of those, which is the third fewest in the league. So you have the ability to cap explosive plays. That's great. You talked about how they have been the last couple of weeks. They have been a lot more effective. This defensive front in particular, Trey Hendrickson is finally getting some help, but they are still 26th in EPA per play against. They only have 90 total pressures. That ranks 20th in the league. They are 26th in touchdown drives allowed at 27.4%. That all needs to get better. That all needs to change. You need to keep stacking these games where it is obvious that the defense is limiting the scoring of its opponents, because that has been the bane of these Bengals' existence through the first 4 weeks this season, especially where the offense is averaging almost 30 points, I think just over 30 points a game, and Joe Burrow's playing out of his mind, and yet the defense is allowing literally 0.1 points more per game on average. That needs to change. And I think, again, coupling this with the Giants game last week and this game against the Browns, which is a winnable game in the division, it's going to matter a whole lot. Limit the amount that they can score. And this is going to go a long way with gaining confidence back in that defense and then the team as a whole, quite frankly.